"Give me 30 seconds, Mr. Wilson," a young girl called from inside the storage room. "This old leg and I are having another disagreement." A metallic click followed, then the sound of her laughter. Jonathan Bennett stopped beside the half-open door. He moved closer, curious about what she had meant by old leg, then looked through the narrow opening. "Would you like to go in, sir?" his assistant asked quietly. Jonathan raised a hand, signaling him to wait. His eyes remained fixed on the young woman sitting inside. Technical drawings covered the table beside her, and she was explaining something to Samuel Wilson while struggling with a worn prosthetic leg. "Not yet," Jonathan said. He glanced at his assistant, Daniel Price. "You know why I came here today? I want to see how people work when they don't know I'm watching. That's why I ordered everyone at headquarters not to announce this visit." Another metallic click came from the storage room. "That doesn't sound like cooperation," Sam said. "It's thinking about it." Jonathan stepped closer. A black girl sat on a folding chair between shelves of printer paper and cleaning supplies. Her navy work pants were rolled above her right knee as she tried to attach the old prosthetic. The plastic socket had faded with years of use. One strap was badly frayed, and the locking mechanism kept slipping before it could fasten. Samuel Wilson, the center's technical manager, stood beside her with his arms folded. "Annie, you don't have to force it," he said. "I've told you before, that leg needs to be replaced. I'm not forcing it, I'm negotiating." "You've been negotiating for 10 minutes. Then we must be close to an agreement." Sam shook his head, though the corner of his mouth lifted. "You can go home and leave the returned joint report unfinished. Someone else can handle it." "They can," Annie said, adjusting the strap. "Then tomorrow I'll have to waste half the morning figuring out what they did to it." A few seconds later, the locking pin snapped into place. Annie gripped the shelf and stood, carefully shifting her weight onto the prosthetic. Her shoulders tightened for a moment, but she made no sound. "See?" she said. "We reached an agreement." Jonathan remained outside the doorway. He looked at the worn prosthetic, then turned to Daniel. "Our company produces some of the most advanced mobility equipment in the country, doesn't it?" "Yes, sir. The research center a few miles from here is developing computer-controlled knees and a new generation of carbon fiber joints." Jonathan watched Annie test the lock again, then explain why one of our own employees is sitting in a storage room, struggling with a prosthetic so old the strap is almost broken. Daniel hesitated. "I'll look into it, sir." Before he could say more, an older woman approached carrying a cardboard tray of coffee. "Did you get it on, honey?" she asked. "For now, Miss Helen." Helen handed Annie a paper cup marked with a large black A. Annie accepted it, then held the door while Helen carried the remaining cups into the hallway. "Careful, Miss Helen. If you spill Mr. Wilson's coffee, we may have to close the building." "I heard that," Sam said. "You were supposed to." Helen laughed and continued down the corridor. Annie walked toward the main office with her coffee. Her first few steps were uneven, but within seconds she had returned to the rhythm of the workday. Beside the folding chair sat a ceramic mug bearing the words "one step at a time." A middle-aged employee was staring at the inventory system when Annie reached the main office. "It deleted the order again," he said. Annie leaned over his shoulder. "You clicked the picture of the blue tab. There's a difference between that and the blue tab?" "The computer thinks there is." She clicked twice, restored the order, and showed him how to save it properly. The telephone on Helen's desk rang. Annie answered before the second ring. "Bennett Medical Technologies, this is Annie. How can I help you?" An elderly customer spoke rapidly through the receiver. He was frightened by an unfamiliar clicking sound coming from his prosthetic knee. "Mr. Talbot, take a breath for me," Annie said. "First, sit down somewhere safe." She waited until he confirmed that he had. "Good. Don't put any more weight on the unit until we check it." She opened his file and asked for the model number near the hinge. An employee standing nearby handed her a technical manual. "Thank you," she whispered. Annie located the model, asked several more questions, then arranged for a technician to inspect the device that afternoon. Before ending the call, she said, "You did the right thing by calling again. From here, let us take care of the rest." Helen returned and placed a breakfast biscuit beside Annie's keyboard. "You haven't eaten." "I was busy settling a dispute." "With whom?" Annie tapped the side of her prosthetic. "My most difficult business partner." "Did you win?" "We signed a temporary ceasefire." Helen laughed. Employees passing Annie's desk greeted her by name. One asked her to check a shipping code. A new employee brought her a form and asked how to complete it. Another thanked her for staying late to answer a customer's call the previous Friday. Nobody treated Annie like someone who needed pity. They came to her because they trusted her. Jonathan watched a little longer before approaching Sam. Does she always use that storage room? Sam turned and finally looked at him closely. Can I help you, sir? I'm here for a quality inspection. We weren't told anyone was coming. That was intentional. Sam glanced toward the reception desk, where Daniel was pretending to read a company brochure. You should join the morning meeting, Sam said. It begins in 5 minutes. Jonathan followed him into the conference room, though his attention remained on Annie through the glass wall. The monthly where the report lay on the table. Every performance indicator met its target. Staffing was described as adequate, and the center's operations were listed as stable. Near the bottom of the final page was a single line. No exceptional employee contributions have been identified. Jonathan read it twice, then looked outside. Annie had tucked a small red notebook beneath her arm. She was comparing returned components with customer complaints, checking one serial number after another. She moved more slowly than the other employees, but her attention never wandered. Jonathan lowered his eyes to the report. Who writes these evaluations? The department supervisors submit them to corporate, Sam answered. Jonathan pointed through the glass. Her name is Annie, correct? Yes, sir. Her name is Annie Carter. Does she always work like this? She arrives early. She stays when customers need help, and she catches mistakes before they become expensive. Then why isn't her name in this report? Sam looked down at the page. Maybe the people writing these reports have never actually watched her work. The meeting began, but Jonathan barely heard the first presentation. He had come to Charlotte to evaluate the quality of his employees. In less than an hour, he had watched an 18-year-old trainee struggle with an old prosthetic, step into the office with a smile, repair a coworker's mistake, and calm a frightened customer. Annie was not the problem at this center. The problem was a system capable of seeing everything she did and still concluding that she had contributed nothing worth mentioning. Jonathan closed the report and turned to Daniel. I want a complete review of Annie Carter, he said quietly. Her work history, evaluations, training, attendance, and every request she has ever submitted. Daniel nodded. How soon do you need it? Jonathan looked through the glass again. Annie had already opened another returned package. Before I leave Charlotte, Daniel left the conference room with the quality report tucked beneath his arm. Jonathan remained by the glass wall as Sam called the morning meeting to order. Paul Mercer, the regional supervisor, stood beside the screen with a remote in his hand. Returns are down 4% from last quarter, Paul began. Customer complaints remain within the acceptable range, and this center is meeting every corporate target. A chart filled the screen, every line marked in green. Jonathan scanned the printed report. How many prosthetic knee units were returned last month? 27. And the month before? 23. Paul paused. That's correct, but the increase is probably seasonal. What caused the returns? Improper fitting, mostly. Customers don't always follow the instructions. Through the glass, Jonathan saw Annie open another box. She placed a black knee joint on a padded mat, checked its serial number, then wrote something in her red notebook. When Paul mentioned improper fitting, she looked toward the conference room. Miss Carter, Jonathan called. Annie glanced behind herself, then pointed at her chest. Yes, you. Come in for a moment. She picked up the notebook and entered. Her first few steps were measured, but the smile remained on her face. Paul lowered the remote. Annie works in service support. She doesn't normally attend quality meetings. Then today will be different, Jonathan said. Annie stopped near the end of the table. Did I enter something incorrectly? No. Mr. Mercer says most returned knee units are caused by customers fitting them improperly. Do you agree? Paul shifted beside the screen. She answers service calls, Mr. Bennett. She isn't responsible for engineering analysis. Jonathan kept his attention on Annie. I asked for her opinion. She glanced at Sam. He gave her a small nod. Not completely, she said. Paul folded his arms. What are you basing that on? The customers who called. Complaints aren't technical evidence. They're still evidence. Jonathan pulled out the empty chair beside him. Tell us what you noticed. Annie set her notebook on the table but remained standing. Most customers describe the same pattern. The knee works normally in the morning. After several hours, it starts clicking or responding more slowly. That usually indicates an incorrect fit, Paul said. Sometimes, but the same problem keeps appearing in the same places. She opened the notebook. The pages contained dates, model numbers, locations, and brief notes arranged in narrow columns. Most of these calls came from Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and southern Texas. The failures happened after people had been outside in hot, humid weather. Paul let out a restrained sigh. Heat exposure is already included in laboratory testing. At what temperature? Annie asked. Within the required federal range. For how long? Paul paused. Jonathan leaned back. Do you know? The engineering department has the full protocol. Annie turned another page. Mr. Talbot called this morning because his knee started clicking while he was gardening. Yesterday it reached 86 degrees in Charlotte, and the humidity was high. His unit is the same model as 19 of the 27 returns. Paul reached toward the notebook. Where did you get those numbers? I reviewed the service records. Who asked you to conduct that review? No one. Paul looked at Sam. Why is a trainee carrying out an independent investigation? Because she noticed a pattern, Sam said. That is not part of her position. No, Sam replied. It is part of how she works. The room went quiet. Annie kept her voice steady. I'm not saying the entire design is defective. The locking ring or sensor seal may react differently after several hours of heat and moisture. Once the unit cools down, it works again, so the system records the case as customer error. Luis Ortega, one of the senior technicians, leaned forward. That could explain why some returned units pass every inspection after arriving here. Paul looked at him. There is no proof. Not yet, Annie said, but there is enough reason to test it. Jonathan tapped the report. This document states that improper installation is the primary cause. Was Annie's information considered before that conclusion was written? I wasn't aware she had collected it, Paul answered. Sam rested both hands on the table. Her notes have been attached to the weekly service report for 6 weeks. Paul's gaze moved from Sam to Annie. I receive a large amount of material. Clearly, Jonathan said. Annie closed the notebook. Mr. Bennett, I could be wrong, but I don't think we should keep blaming customers until we know for certain. Jonathan studied her. She showed no satisfaction at challenging Paul and made no attempt to embarrass him. She simply wanted the problem investigated. What would you test first? He asked. I would place one of the returned units in a heated humidity chamber for several hours, not just for the minimum standard cycle. Then I would compare the locking response before and after moisture reaches the seal. Luis nodded. We can do that here. Paul turned toward him. This center isn't authorized to change corporate testing procedures. Then don't change them, Jonathan said. Run an additional test. I would need formal approval. You have it. Jonathan looked at Annie. Give Mr. Ortega every serial number you tracked. Yes, sir. And send me a copy of your notes. I will. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Paul finished his presentation without directing another question toward Annie. When the room emptied, Jonathan remained with Sam. How long has she been tracking these failures? Since her second week here. And no one at corporate noticed? I sent the information. That wasn't what I asked. Sam gathered the abandoned handouts. Then no, sir. No one noticed. Outside, Annie and Luis were already separating returned knee units. Helen stood beside them with a roll of shipping labels. You planning to solve another department's problem before lunch? Helen asked. I'd prefer to solve it before lunch. I'm getting hungry. That biscuit is still beside your keyboard. I'm building suspense. You're building low blood sugar. Helen placed the biscuit directly on Annie's notebook. At a nearby desk, a new employee raised his hand. Annie. Do you have a minute? Give me 2. He held up a shipping form. I think I sent a replacement joint to the wrong address. Annie checked the computer, found the mistake, and showed him how to stop the package before pickup. Don't worry, she said. Everyone does it once. Did you? Twice. That's why I'm an expert. The young man relaxed. Jonathan watched the employees around her. When they needed help, they did not search for a supervisor. They searched for Annie. Daniel returned carrying a slim personnel file. This is everything stored locally, he said quietly. Attendance, training records, and performance evaluations. Corporate is sending the remaining documents. Jonathan opened it. Annie had never missed a shift without notice. She had completed every optional training module available to her position. 12 customer comments mentioned her by name. Her official rating still read, "Meets minimum expectations." Jonathan turned the page. Sam had submitted 3 separate recommendations asking that Annie be admitted to the company's technical training program. All 3 had been rejected. If you believe Annie deserved to be recognized for her talent and hard work, please give this video a like to show your support for her. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. You may be surprised to discover that someone near you is watching Annie's story right along with you. Each form gave the same reason: insufficient professional background, not recommended for advancement. Jonathan looked through the glass. Annie was kneeling beside an open return box, showing Louise the location of the seal she believed was failing. Her notebook lay open between them. Who rejected these applications? Jonathan asked. Daniel checked the signatures. Human Resources approved the decisions. But the recommendations came from Research and Operations. Malcolm Reed? Yes, sir. Jonathan closed the file. Get me the original submissions. I want the timestamps, every revision, and the name of each person who opened them. I'll contact legal. And don't tell Malcolm what we're reviewing. Daniel nodded and left. Across the room, Annie laughed when Helen pushed the forgotten biscuit closer to her hand. Jonathan had come to Charlotte to measure his employees against the standards of the company he had built. Annie had not failed to meet the company's standards, but the company's standards had failed to recognize Annie. By early afternoon, Daniel had obtained the original versions of Sam's 3 recommendations. He placed the files beside Jonathan in an unused office overlooking the service floor. The local copies match what Sam submitted, Daniel said. The wording changed after they reached corporate. Jonathan opened the first recommendation. Sam had described Annie as reliable, observant, and unusually skilled at connecting customer complaints with recurring technical problems. He had requested that she be admitted to the company's entry-level technical training program. The version returned by Human Resources contained only 2 sentences: limited formal education, insufficient preparation for technical advancement. Jonathan compared the dates. Who changed it? The file was opened by Victoria Lang's office, then forwarded to Research and Operations. Malcolm's department. Yes. Any explanation? None in the record. Jonathan looked through the glass. Annie was standing beside Louise at the testing station while he placed one of the returned knee units inside the humidity chamber. She read serial numbers from her notebook, then checked them against the labels on the workbench. How old is she? Jonathan asked. 18. And she has been here how long? 6 months. Jonathan closed the file. Bring Sam in. Sam entered a few minutes later and remained standing until Jonathan pointed to the chair across from him. I read your original recommendations, Jonathan said. You rated Annie well above the minimum. I rated the work I saw. Why did you submit the same request 3 times? Because the first 2 answers didn't make sense. What answer were you expecting? One based on her ability. Jonathan placed the altered version beside Sam's original. Did you ever see this wording? Sam read it, and his expression hardened. No. You wrote that she had strong technical instincts. Corporate reduced that to limited formal education. She's taking engineering classes at Central Piedmont. That isn't in her personnel file. It should be. What else should be there? Sam leaned back. She gets here before 8, even though she takes 2 buses. She finishes her own work, then helps everyone else finish theirs. She understands customers because she listens before she talks. If a returned part doesn't match the explanation in the system, she keeps looking. Why hasn't she applied for a position somewhere else? You'll have to ask her. Jonathan studied him. You know more than you're saying. I know what she has chosen to tell me. That doesn't make it mine to repeat. Jonathan accepted the correction. Fair enough. Sam stood to leave, then stopped at the door. Mr. Bennett, Annie doesn't want anyone making room for her because they feel sorry for her. If you offer her something, make sure she earned it. That is exactly what I intend to find out. When the lunch hour arrived, most employees gathered around the break room tables with paper bags and plastic containers. Jonathan found Annie sitting near the window with a bowl of macaroni and cheese. Her phone rested against a napkin holder while she spoke to someone on speaker. Did you take your break? Annie asked. A woman's tired voice answered, I'm taking it now. That means you're still standing near the loading desk. I sat down for almost a minute. Mom. All right, I'm sitting. And you brought the chicken salad? Yes, ma'am. Annie smiled. Good. I'll call after class. She ended the call and noticed Jonathan near the door. Sorry. My mother and I supervise each other. Does she work nearby? At a distribution center off Wilkinson Boulevard. She works nights, so I call before she gets too busy. Jonathan gestured toward the empty chair. May I? It's your company. That wasn't my question. Annie moved her notebook aside. Yes, sir. Jonathan sat. Sam says you attend Central Piedmont, 3 nights a week. What are you studying? Engineering technology. Mostly fundamentals right now. Why isn't that listed in your employee file? I added it to my application. Did anyone ask for an update? No. Jonathan looked at the red notebook beside her food. You take that everywhere? Pretty much. What made you start tracking the knee unit calls? The explanations didn't match what people were telling me. After a while, I thought either 27 customers were making the same mistake, or we were. You weren't assigned to review them. No, sir. Then why spend your own time doing it? Annie stirred the macaroni with her fork. Because the customers kept apologizing. For what? For bothering us. For not understanding the equipment. One man said he felt stupid because the unit worked when the technician checked it. I didn't think he was stupid. Jonathan waited. If we blame the customer too quickly, Annie continued, we stop looking for the actual problem. Her answer carried no accusation, but Jonathan felt it land on more than the returned devices. He glanced toward her prosthetic. May I ask about the leg? You can ask. How old is it? 3 years. It was provided through a support program? The Carolina Children's Mobility Fund. My mother applied twice before they had an opening. Why hasn't it been replaced? Annie took a sip of water. Because I'm not a child anymore, so I don't qualify for the same program. Our insurance covers repairs, but not a full replacement unless the device fails completely. It barely locked this morning. It's still locked. That is a low standard. It's the standard the insurance company uses. Jonathan had no answer ready. Annie saved him from the silence. It has been a good leg. It got me through high school, my first job, and more bus rides than I can count. What happened to your right leg? A car accident when I was 11. She said it plainly, without changing her tone. My mother says I complained more about missing a school field trip than the surgery. Jonathan smiled. Were you always this optimistic? No. Sometimes I'm difficult before breakfast. I'm serious. Suomi. She set down her fork. Being angry won't make the leg fit better, but a good day can still be a good day, even when part of it hurts. Jonathan looked at the technical poster hanging across the room. It showed a runner wearing one of Bennett Medical Technology's newest prosthetic systems. What would you do if you could choose any position in this company? Annie followed his gaze. I'd design prosthetics. You want to be an engineer? Yes. Why? Because the best devices cost more than most working families can afford. I want to help build something people can actually get. Not just something they admire in a brochure. Helen entered the break room carrying a stack of forms. Annie, Louise says the first unit is ready for the humidity test. Annie stood and covered her food. I'm coming. She looked at Jonathan. Was that all, sir? For now. As she reached the doorway, he spoke again. Annie. She turned. If an opportunity opened in technical research, would you take it? Her expression became more careful. If I qualified, and if someone offered it because of what happened this morning, then I'd ask for the same test everyone else takes. She left before Jonathan could respond. Daniel appeared in the doorway a moment later with the remaining corporate records. Jonathan looked at Sam's 3 rejected recommendations, then at the break room table where Annie's bus pass rested beside her unfinished lunch. The company had already decided she lacked the right background. No one had bothered to find out what she could do. The first humidity test ended shortly after 3 that afternoon. Luis removed the knee unit from the chamber and placed it on the workbench, while Annie recorded the temperature, exposure time, and serial number. The joint responded normally during the first movement. On the 4th cycle, the locking mechanism hesitated. By the 7th, it began producing the same clicking sound customers had reported. Luis repeated the test with a second returned unit. The result was the same. Paul stood behind them with his hands in his pockets. Run it again tomorrow with a control unit. We will, Luis said. Annie wrote the result in her notebook. We should also check the seal after it cools. Paul looked at her. Why? Because that's when the units start passing inspection again. He did not answer. Jonathan had watched the entire test from the other side of the workbench. Annie never celebrated when the mechanism failed. She simply checked the numbers and prepared the next step. "Miss Carter," he said, "finish documenting this with Mr. Ortega, then join us in the conference room at 4. Her pencil stopped. "Am I in trouble?" "No." That sounded like the kind of no people say before explaining the trouble. Louise hid a smile. Jonathan said, 4 o'clock. At 3:55, Annie entered the conference room carrying her red notebook. Sam, Paul, and Daniel were already seated. A video screen at the far end showed 2 executives calling from the research headquarters across town. Malcolm Reed sat in the center of the screen. His gray suit looked untouched by the workday. Beside him was Victoria Lang, the company's director of human resources. Annie recognized both names from the rejection notices Sam had shown her. Jonathan motioned toward the empty chair. "Sit down, Annie." This time, she did. Jonathan placed the test results on the table. The service center reproduced the failure reported by 19 customers. Miss Carter identified the pattern before anyone in engineering requested a review. Malcolm glanced at the document. "I understand she organized customer complaints. She identified a possible relationship between heat, humidity, and sensor failure. With respect, Jonathan, spotting a pattern in service calls is not engineering. No one said it was. That is why we tested it." Victoria folded her hands. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I want Annie evaluated for the entry-level technical training program." Annie looked at Jonathan but said nothing. Malcolm leaned closer to his camera. "We have applicants with engineering degrees waiting for those positions. The program does not require an engineering degree," Jonathan said. "It requires evidence that the employee can work in a technical environment. Then evaluate the evidence." Malcolm's expression remained controlled. "She is 18 years old. She has 6 months of service, support experience, and no professional research background. She has completed every technical module available to her position," Sam said. "I submitted that information 3 times. Victoria looked down at something outside the camera. The applications were reviewed. "No," Jonathan said. "They were shortened, rewritten, and rejected." The room became still. Victoria lifted her eyes. "Are you accusing human resources of altering records?" "I'm stating what the file history shows." Malcolm spoke before she could respond. "Jonathan, this is becoming personal. You arrived this morning, saw a young employee with a difficult circumstance, and decided the company had failed her." Annie's posture changed slightly. Jonathan noticed. "This is not about her circumstances," he said. "It is about her work." "Then let the normal process continue." "The normal process rejected her 3 times without testing her." Malcolm's voice hardened. "Tests can measure skills. They cannot measure whether someone belongs in the room." Jonathan stared at the screen. "Who gave you the right to decide who belongs?" Malcolm did not answer. Annie placed both hands on the table. "May I say something?" Jonathan nodded. She looked toward the screen. "I don't want to be placed in the program because Mr. Bennett visited today." Victoria's expression softened in a way that looked practiced. "That is a sensible concern, Annie." "I'm not finished." Sam lowered his eyes to hide his approval. Annie continued, "Give me the same assessment you give other applicants. Same questions, same time limit, same scoring. If I qualify, let me train. If I don't, tell me what I need to learn." Malcolm studied her. "And if you fail?" "I go back to work and keep studying." Jonathan asked, "Is the standard assessment available next week?" Victoria hesitated. "It can be arranged." "Good. Daniel will monitor the process, and an independent technical reviewer will score it." Malcolm sat back. "You do not trust my department to evaluate one trainee?" "I do not trust any department to investigate itself." The call ended with the assessment scheduled for the following Thursday. When the screen went dark, Annie closed her notebook. "Thank you for the opportunity," she said. "You asked to earn it," Jonathan replied. "Now earn it." She smiled. "That part I know how to do." For the next 8 days, Annie followed the same schedule. She arrived before 8, completed her service work, helped Luis document the humidity tests, and attended class at Central Piedmont 3 evenings that week. Sam reviewed mechanical drawings with her during lunch. He did not give her answers. "You're reading the load direction backward," he said one afternoon. Annie turned the page around. The page was upside down. The page was fine. Then I was upside down. Helen brought chicken soup in a thermos and a square of cornbread wrapped in foil. You need food if you're going to argue with engineers, she said. I thought I was taking a test. Same thing, but the test uses less expensive words. At home, Grace sat at the kitchen table after her night shift, while Annie practiced explaining a pressure distribution diagram. You lost me after lateral force, Grace said. That means I explained it badly. I work in a warehouse, baby. I'm not your target audience. If I understand it, I should be able to explain it to anyone. Grace pointed toward the diagram. Then start again. And this time, pretend I'm tired. You are tired. Exactly. Realistic testing conditions. On Thursday morning, Annie reported to a testing room at the research headquarters. She wore the navy jacket Grace had found at a discount store and carried 2 sharpened pencils, her calculator and the red notebook, though the proctor made her leave the notebook outside. The assessment lasted 4 hours. It covered technical reading, safety procedures, data analysis, and mechanical reasoning. The final section required Annie to review a simulated product failure and present a practical response. She did not know every formula. When she was uncertain, she said so and explained how she would verify the answer. She found 2 errors in the supplied customer data and recommended testing the device under real-world conditions instead of repeating the same laboratory cycle. The results arrived the next afternoon. Annie's theoretical score ranked near the middle of the applicant group. Her scores in fault detection, user analysis, and practical problem-solving were among the highest. The independent reviewer recommended her for a 3-month position as a technical research trainee. Sam read the result twice before handing it to her. You earned the room, he said. Annie looked at the paper, then at the people gathered around her desk. Helen was already crying. Miss Helen, please don't, Annie said. You'll make everyone think I'm leaving forever. You're going 25 minutes across town. At my age, that is forever. The following Monday, Grace adjusted the collar of Annie's jacket beside the apartment door. You don't have to look like those people, she said. You just have to walk in knowing why you're there. Annie held up her new identification badge. Technical research trainee. Grace smiled. Sounds expensive. The jacket was 30% off. I raised you right. At 8:30, Annie stood before the glass entrance of the main research building. Her old prosthetic clicked softly as she shifted her weight. Inside, several employees looked toward her badge, then toward her leg. At the service center, everyone had known her name. Here, before she had taken a single step, some of them had already decided she did not belong. The security guard checked Annie's new badge twice before handing it back. Research is on the 4th floor, he said. Visitors sign in at the desk. I'm not a visitor. He looked at the badge again. Right. Technical trainee, Annie smiled. That's what the expensive plastic says. The guard's expression softened. He pointed toward the elevators. 4th floor. Turn left when you get out. Thank you. The elevator doors opened onto a wide corridor lined with glass offices. Employees moved between laboratories carrying tablets, sealed component cases, and stainless steel trays. Annie stepped aside to let 2 engineers pass. One of them glanced at her badge, then at her prosthetic leg. At the service center, people usually asked whether she needed help. Here, they watched long enough to decide whether she should. A woman named Claire Holden met Annie outside the main laboratory. She was the project coordinator, dressed in a gray suit with a company tablet pressed against her chest. You're Annie Carter? Yes, ma'am. Claire is fine. Mr. Reed asked me to complete your orientation. Claire walked quickly, forcing Annie to adjust her pace. The fabrication room is restricted. The environmental testing chamber requires supervisor approval, and you are not to operate powered equipment without a senior engineer present. Understood. Your desk is near records. They stopped at a small workstation beside the storage cabinets. The desk was lower than the others, but the chair could not be adjusted. A cardboard box filled the space beneath it. Annie looked around. I was told an adaptive chair had been requested. Claire checked her tablet. It's still awaiting approval. Do you know how long that takes? Facilities handles those requests. Should I call them? I wouldn't. Repeated requests can slow the process. Annie was not sure how asking twice could make a chair arrive more slowly. But she nodded. Claire handed her a stack of printed documents. You can begin by checking the part numbers against the digital inventory. Will I be attending the design review this morning? Claire paused. That meeting is for the core research team. My training schedule says I'm supposed to observe. I'll ask Mr. Reed. Claire left before Annie could answer. Annie lowered herself into the chair. The angle placed pressure against the upper edge of her prosthetic socket. She shifted to the left, moved the cardboard box, and used it to support her foot. A man at the next desk glanced over, creative. I studied advanced furniture engineering. He smiled despite himself. Marcus Lee, junior mechanical engineer. Annie Carter, advanced box specialist. Marcus shook her hand. I saw your presentation from the service event. You and my mother, that makes 2 viewers. More than 2. People were talking about it upstairs. That sounds either promising or dangerous. Here, it can be both. Annie began checking the inventory sheets. Within 20 minutes, she found 2 part numbers that did not match the digital record. She marked them with yellow tabs and continued. Across the aisle, 2 engineers spoke beside a printer. They were not whispering as quietly as they thought. That's Bennett's new trainee? The one from the service office. I heard he created the position after seeing her leg. Good publicity, I guess. Annie kept reading. Marcus looked toward them, then back at her. You heard that? I have 1 missing leg, Marcus. My ears are both original. You could say something. I could. Or I could finish before they do. At 10:30, Claire returned. Mr. Reed approved you to observe the design review, but you will take notes only. I can do that. The conference room was already full when Annie entered. Malcolm Reed sat at the head of the table. He gave her a brief glance. Miss Carter, sit near the end, please. The only empty chair was against the far wall, several feet from the table. Annie carried it closer, but Malcolm stopped her. That area needs to remain clear for foot traffic. She returned the chair to the wall and opened her notebook. A senior engineer named Dr. Nathan Cole presented a problem involving a new hydraulic ankle system. The joint performed well in controlled testing but felt unstable when users moved between flat surfaces and ramps. We may need a stronger resistance setting, Nathan said. That would increase battery use, another engineer replied. Then we modify the power unit. Annie studied the diagram projected on the screen. The transition sensor was positioned near the rear of the housing. She raised her hand. Malcolm continued speaking as though he had not seen it. Annie waited, then lowered her hand. A few minutes later, she raised it again. Malcolm stopped. Do you have a question? It may not need stronger resistance. Nathan looked toward her. What do you mean? The sensor reacts after the user's weight has already shifted forward. On a ramp, that delay might make the ankle feel unstable. Moving the sensor closer to the center could let it detect the angle earlier. Malcolm tapped his pen against the table. The sensor position has already been reviewed. Annie looked at the diagram. Was it tested with slower users? We test according to the approved protocol. Some older customers take shorter steps. The weight transfer would last longer. This is a design meeting, Miss Carter. You are here to observe. Annie closed her mouth and wrote in her notebook, test sensor placement with slower gait. The meeting continued. 10 minutes later, Nathan enlarged the same diagram. What if the issue is timing rather than resistance? He asked. We could reposition the sensor toward the center and test it with a slower walking cycle. Several people nodded. Malcolm leaned forward. That is worth exploring. Annie looked down at her notebook. Marcus, seated across the room, met her eyes. His jaw tightened. After the meeting, he caught up with her in the corridor. He repeated exactly what you said. Almost exactly. And Reed praised him for it. Annie opened her notebook and wrote beneath the first line. Same idea, different voice. Marcus read it. That doesn't bother you? It bothers me. You don't look angry. I'm at work. Not looking angry is apparently part of my training. That isn't fair. No, Annie said. But getting angry in the hallway won't put my name on the test results. She returned to her desk and finished the inventory review before lunch. By noon, she had identified 6 mismatched part numbers and 1 batch of seals stored under the wrong temperature requirement. Claire examined the list. Who asked you to check the storage conditions? No one. The label caught my attention. Claire looked at the marked container, then called a laboratory technician. The seals were removed before they could be used in a prototype. You prevented a full batch from being assembled incorrectly, Marcus said after Claire walked away. Annie reached for the sandwich Grace had packed that morning. I also made it to lunch without the chair collapsing. Productive day. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan. How is the first morning? Annie looked at the cardboard box beneath her foot, the 6 corrected records, and the note in her red notebook. She typed, "The work is interesting. The furniture is losing." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. A moment later, Jonathan replied, "I'll visit this afternoon." Annie put the phone away. She did not intend to complain to him about the chair, the comments, or the meeting. She had asked for the chance to prove herself, and she planned to do exactly that. Across the floor, Malcolm stood inside his glass office, speaking quietly with Claire while looking toward Annie's desk. Annie took another bite of her sandwich and opened the next inventory file. She had been inside the research building for less than 4 hours. Her work had already prevented one production mistake and offered a solution in a room where no one wanted to hear it from her. The problem was no longer whether Annie could keep up. The problem was how long the people around her could continue pretending they did not see her. Jonathan arrived at the research building shortly after 2. He did not go to Malcolm's office. Instead, he entered through the main laboratory and walked the floor without an escort. Annie was at her desk, comparing inventory records with storage labels. The cardboard box still supported her right foot. Jonathan stopped beside her. "The furniture is losing?" Annie looked up from the screen. "It has shown remarkable endurance." He examined the chair. "Where is the adjustable one you requested?" "Facilities is reviewing it." "How long have they been reviewing it?" "Long enough for this box to earn seniority." Marcus turned away from his computer to hide a smile. Jonathan looked toward Claire's desk. "Who submitted the request?" "I did," Claire answered. "It's pending approval." "Approve it." "I don't have that authority." "Who does?" "Human Resources." Jonathan took out his phone and called Daniel. "I need every accommodation request from this building for the last 2 years. Approved, denied, and pending. Includes submission dates and the names of everyone who handled them." Claire shifted the tablet against her chest. "Mr. Bennett, these requests normally go through established channels. I am examining the channels." He ended the call. Annie stood. "Mr. Bennett, I don't want this turning into a special case." "It isn't. It may look like one." Jonathan glanced at the box under her desk. "Then the policy needs to work before I arrive, not only after." He walked away before she could respond. Malcolm intercepted him near the elevators. "I heard you were visiting. That seems to happen quickly in this building. We should talk privately." "No, I want to see the production floor first." Malcolm lowered his voice. "Jonathan, people are becoming distracted. Annie has been here half a day, and senior staff are already being questioned about chairs, meetings, and inventory. She found 6 record errors this morning. That is not the issue. What is? The way you are involving yourself. Employees need a clear reporting structure. Then the structure should be able to answer simple questions." Malcolm kept pace beside him. "You are treating ordinary administrative delays as evidence of misconduct." "I have not called them misconduct. You asked for 2 years of records. I asked for information. And what are you hoping to find?" Jonathan stopped outside the elevator. "That depends on what is there." He pressed the call button and stepped inside alone. At the service center, Jonathan had seen how employees worked when no executive was watching. At the research building, he wanted to know what happened after their work entered the reporting system. He spent the next hour moving between departments. He asked technicians how problems were documented, how training candidates were selected, and what happened when an employee challenged a supervisor's conclusion. The answers sounded rehearsed until he asked for examples. A laboratory assistant said every request received fair consideration, but could not name anyone from service support who had entered technical training in the past 3 years. A production manager said promotions were based on performance, then admitted he had never seen the scoring method. A technician using a cane told Jonathan that his request for a parking space near the entrance had remained pending for 4 months. "Did anyone explain the delay?" Jonathan asked. "They said the committee meets quarterly." "When is the next meeting?" The technician gave a tired laugh. "Depends who asks." Jonathan called Rachel Moore before leaving the floor. She answered on the second ring. "You usually call me after something has gone wrong. This time I'm calling before I decide how wrong it is." "That sounds worse. I need you in Charlotte." "When?" "Tonight." Rachel was silent for a moment. "What am I reviewing?" "Personnel evaluations, promotion records, accommodation requests, and changes made between local submissions and corporate decisions." Do you suspect discrimination? I suspect the reports are not telling me the truth. That is not the same thing. I know. Then do not confront anyone else until I secure the records. Jonathan looked through the glass office at Malcolm, who was speaking with Victoria on a video call. How quickly can you preserve the files? I can issue an internal legal hold immediately. Once that goes out, deleting or modifying anything becomes a serious problem. Do it. Jonathan, if senior officers are involved, they will know an investigation has started. They already know I'm asking questions. Questions make people nervous. A legal hold makes them careful. I can live with careful. Rachel arrived in Charlotte shortly after 7 that evening. She met Jonathan and Daniel in a private conference room at a hotel near the airport. Her travel bag remained beside the door while she opened her laptop. Daniel had assembled the first set of records. Rachel read silently for several minutes. The local recommendations for Annie are detailed, she said. The corporate versions are not. Can you prove they were changed? The system should preserve revision histories unless someone had administrative access. Victoria's office does. That does not prove she used it. Jonathan leaned back. What do we need? Original files, server logs, email attachments, and the approval sequence. We also need comparison groups. Meaning? Other employees who applied for the same training program. Their education, experience, ratings, and outcomes. Annie's case alone may show unfair treatment. A pattern shows a system. Daniel slid another folder across the table. I found something else. The folder contained budget summaries for workplace accessibility. The amount approved by the board was higher than the amount spent on equipment and accommodations. Jonathan turned to the final page. Where did the difference go? Daniel pointed to a transfer code. Corporate communications. Rachel checked the account description. Public outreach and brand inclusion campaign. Jonathan stared at the figures. Money intended to provide equipment for disabled employees had been redirected into advertisements about how much the company valued disabled people. Rachel closed the folder. Do not react yet. They used accommodation funds for marketing. It appears that way. We still need authorization records. Whose signature? Malcolm's division requested the transfer. Victoria certified that all urgent employee needs had already been met. Jonathan thought of Annie's cardboard box and the technician who had waited 4 months for a parking space. Rachel watched him carefully. Anger is useful only if it keeps you focused. What would you call this? En indication, not a conclusion. Jonathan stood and walked to the window. Aircraft lights moved across the dark sky beyond the highway. How many people do you think were ignored? Rachel did not answer immediately. We will know when we stop looking at individual complaints and start comparing them. Daniel opened his laptop. Where do we begin? Rachel organized the documents into separate stacks. First, preserve every personnel record before anyone can change it. Second, compare local evaluations with corporate summaries. Third, identify who had editing access. Fourth, review promotion rates by department, race, and disability status. Fifth, interview employees without their supervisors present. Jonathan turned from the window. And the accessibility budget? We trace every dollar. The next morning, the legal hold reached every senior office in the company. At 9:12, Malcolm called Jonathan. What exactly do you think you're doing? Jonathan stood in the research building's cafeteria, watching employees carry breakfast trays toward separate tables. I'm checking the system. You are treating your own leadership team like suspects. No, Malcolm. I'm treating the records like evidence. Across the room, Annie entered with Marcus. She saw Jonathan, offered a small wave, and continued toward the coffee station. Malcolm's voice tightened. All of this because of one trainee? Jonathan watched Annie stop to help an older employee lift a tray from the counter. No, he said. She was simply the first person I finally noticed. Annie reached the laboratory before 8 the next morning. The adjustable chair Jonathan had ordered had finally arrived, though no one mentioned why a request that had remained pending for weeks had been approved overnight. Marcus helped her lower the seat and adjust the foot support. How does it feel? He asked. Like the furniture and I have entered peace talks. Any chance of a permanent treaty? Let's not rush diplomacy. Across the room, Luis was preparing the returned knee units for the second round of testing. He had placed one customer return and one unused control unit beside the humidity chamber. Annie set her red notebook on the workbench. Same temperature as yesterday? 88 degrees, Luis said. Humidity, At 80%. We'll test both units every 30 minutes. Dr. Nathan Cole entered carrying the official laboratory protocol. He placed it beside Annie's notes. The standard cycle lasts 45 minutes, he said. We've never kept the units inside longer because they pass the required test. The customers aren't using them for 45 minutes, Annie replied. Nathan glanced at her, then at the chamber. That is what we are here to find out. Malcolm appeared at the doorway before the first cycle began. This test has not been approved through research and operations. Luis continued checking the sensors. Mr. Bennett authorized it. I am aware of what Mr. Bennett said. I am also responsible for protecting the integrity of this laboratory. Annie looked at the chamber. We're using the same equipment and recording every condition. That does not make this an official study. No, Nathan said. The results will determine whether we need one. Malcolm's eyes settled on Annie. You are here to observe, Miss Carter. Do not confuse access with authority. Annie met his gaze without changing her expression. I won't. He waited as though expecting more, then left. Marcus watched the door close. You're better at that than I am. At what? Not saying what you're thinking. I'm saving it for my memoir. The first readings showed no difference between the returned unit and the control. Both responded within normal range. After 1 hour, the control unit continued operating normally. The returned unit showed a slight delay in the locking response. At 90 minutes, the delay increased. Luis checked the monitor twice. There it is. Annie leaned closer, but did not touch the equipment. Run the movement cycle again. The knee flexed, extended and locked. On the 5th repetition, a faint click came from the housing, the same sound Mr. Talbot had described. Nathan looked at Annie. You were right about the exposure time. We still need to know why. They removed the unit and opened the outer housing. A thin layer of moisture had formed near the sensor seal. The adhesive holding one edge of the seal had softened. Marcus pointed toward the gap. Moisture is reaching the connection. Luis checked the control unit. Its seal remained firm. Different adhesive batch, he said. Annie turned to the records terminal. Can we trace the returned units by production date? Nathan nodded. Pull the batch numbers. They worked through the morning, comparing manufacturing records with the serial numbers in Annie's notebook. 17 of the 19 failed units had been assembled during the same 6-week period. All used a replacement adhesive approved by research and operations after the original supplier raised its price. Nathan stared at the screen. This material was approved as equivalent. Was it tested for extended humidity? Annie asked. The certification file says it passed the standard cycle. 45 minutes. Nathan exhaled. 45 minutes. Luis leaned against the workbench. Customers were blamed for improper fitting because the units worked again after they cooled. Annie looked at the returned knee joint. And every time we sent one back without finding the cause, another customer was told the same thing. No one responded. At noon, Malcolm called Nathan into his office. Annie stayed in the laboratory with Luis and Marcus, organizing the results into a timeline. An hour later, Nathan returned without his jacket. He wants the test classified as preliminary, he said. It is preliminary, Annie replied. He also wants the report to state that the engineering team identified the adhesive issue during routine review. Marcus looked up. That isn't what happened. I told him that. What did he say? Luis asked. That customer service observations are not technical findings. Annie closed her notebook. The finding came from the test. The test happened because of your observations, Nathan said. She looked toward Malcolm's glass office. Will my name be on the report? Nathan hesitated just long enough to answer the question. Marcus pushed back from the table. That's not right. Annie picked up her pencil. Then we document everything before anyone forgets how it happened. Nathan studied her. You're not angry? I am. You don't sound angry. My voice isn't the part doing the work. She wrote the date, time, test conditions, and names of everyone present. Luis added his signature beneath the readings. Marcus signed as a witness. After a moment, Nathan signed too. By mid-afternoon, the team tested a new seal made with the original adhesive. It remained stable through 3 hours of heat and humidity. Nathan prepared a corrective action recommendation. Restore the original adhesive. Add extended humidity testing. Notify service centers. Reinspect all units from the affected production period. Annie added one more recommendation. Call the customers whose claims were classified as user error. Louise nodded. We should replace their units. And apologize, she said. Nathan included both points. When Jonathan entered the laboratory near 4, the failed seal and the replacement sample were lying side by side on the workbench. Show me, he said. Annie explained the test from the beginning. She described the customer pattern, the production batch, and the difference between the standard cycle and real-world use. She did not exaggerate her role or minimize anyone else's. Jonathan read the signed timeline. Who prepared this? We all did, Annie said. Nathan handed him Malcolm's revised draft. Jonathan compared the two documents. In Malcolm's version, Annie's name did not appear once. He called this a routine engineering review, Jonathan said. Nathan nodded. That was his instruction. Jonathan looked through the glass toward Malcolm's office. Routine reviews do not begin with 6 weeks of ignored service notes. Annie capped her pen. The important thing is fixing the units. It is important, Jonathan said. So is recording who found the problem. She glanced at him. I don't need a ceremony. No, you need an accurate record. Jonathan handed the revised draft back to Nathan. Do not submit this version. File the signed timeline with the test results and list every contributor. Through the glass, Malcolm saw the exchange. His expression did not change, but he picked up his phone. That evening, Annie received an email informing her that all future laboratory access would require direct approval from research and operations. Marcus read the message over her shoulder. He's shutting you out. Annie folded the printed test results and slipped them into her red notebook. No, she said. He's showing us where to look next. The new access restriction took effect the following morning. Annie's badge opened the 4th floor entrance and the records room. But the laboratory reader flashed red. Marcus tried his badge. The door unlocked at once. So much for subtlety, he said. Annie slipped her badge back into its holder. Maybe the machine doesn't like me. The machine got an email from Malcolm. She looked through the glass at Louise preparing another humidity test. Then I'll work from the records room. You help start the investigation. And now I can help organize the results. Marcus held the door open. You could call Mr. Bennett. I could also give Malcolm exactly what he wants. What's that? A reason to say I only get through doors when Jonathan opens them. She handed Marcus a list of serial numbers. Ask Louise to compare these with the replacement claims from Georgia. I'll review the customer notes. By noon, Annie had connected 11 more service complaints to the same adhesive batch without stepping inside the laboratory. Jonathan learned about the restriction from Daniel, not from her. She didn't report it? He asked. No, sir. She asked records for access to archived service calls and kept working. Jonathan looked toward Malcolm's office. And the restriction was approved by whom? Malcolm. He classified the laboratory as a controlled environment after yesterday's test. Was it controlled before Annie found the defect? No. Jonathan could have reversed the order immediately, but Rachel's warning remained clear. If he reacted to every move, Malcolm would keep presenting him as an executive driven by one employee's situation rather than evidence. Preserve the access logs, Jonathan said. Her badge history, Marcus's badge history, and the time Malcolm changed the rule. Daniel nodded. There's something else. The Carolina Children's Mobility Fund is holding a community meeting tonight. Annie and her mother are registered to attend. Jonathan looked at him. Why do we know that? The fund appears in her original benefits application. You asked for the complete file. Did Annie invite anyone from the company? No. Jonathan considered it. Find out whether the meeting is open to donors and local employers. It was. That evening, Jonathan arrived at a small community center near Freedom Drive without Daniel, a driver or a company badge. Folding chairs faced a portable screen. Parents spoke with prosthetists at card tables, while children tested crutches, socket liners, and donated mobility equipment. Annie stood near the refreshment table beside a woman wearing a Navy Distribution Center jacket. They had the same eyes and the same habit of listening without interrupting. Annie noticed Jonathan first. Mr. Bennett? The woman beside her turned. Jonathan approached. I hope I'm not intruding. You came to a mobility fund meeting, Annie said. That usually means paperwork, money, or free cookies. I was told employers could attend. Annie looked at the plate in his hand. So, Free cookies. The woman extended her hand. Grace Carter. Jonathan Bennett. I know who you are. Her handshake was firm. She did not seem impressed. Annie picked up 2 cups of sweet tea. Mr. Bennett. This is my mother. Mom. This is the man who keeps asking questions at work. Somebody should, Grace said. They sat at the end of a long table while a volunteer explained new funding limits to the room. Grace listened closely, marking sections in a printed booklet. Jonathan glanced at Annie's prosthetic. Is this the organization that provided your current leg? Yes, Grace answered. She was 15. The fund paid for the socket, the joint, and most of the therapy. Annie lifted her cup. It survived high school. That alone should qualify it for an award. Grace looked at Jonathan. It was never meant to last this long. Why hasn't it been replaced? Because the children's program ends at 18. Our insurance calls a new device an upgrade unless the old one stops working completely. It failed to lock this week. And then it locked, Annie said. Grace gave her daughter a look. That is the argument she keeps using. It's a strong argument. It is an 18-year-old argument. Jonathan smiled, but Grace did not. Are you helping my daughter because she is good at her job? Grace asked. Or because you saw her struggling with that leg? Annie set down her tea. Mom, no baby. It's a fair question. Jonathan took a moment before answering. Seeing the leg made me stop. Watching her work made me stay. Grace studied him. She found a product problem that had been overlooked for weeks. He continued. She passed the company's technical assessment. She earned her place in research. And yet she was locked out of the laboratory this morning. Annie turned toward her. How did you know that? You answer my questions too quickly when something is wrong. Jonathan did not defend the company. I'm investigating the decision, he said. Grace folded the booklet. Annie has spent years making people comfortable. She smiles, so I won't worry. She makes jokes, so coworkers won't feel awkward. Then folks start believing nothing hurts her. Mom, I'm sitting right here. I know. That's why I'm saying it where you can correct me. Annie looked down at her hands. Grace continued more quietly. Some nights, she takes that leg off and can't sleep because the socket presses in the wrong places. By morning, she's in the kitchen asking whether I want eggs or oatmeal. Annie looked at Jonathan. She's making it sound dramatic. You burned the oatmeal last Tuesday, Grace said. That was unrelated. Grace's expression softened, but her voice remained steady. My daughter isn't cheerful because life has been easy. She is cheerful because she refuses to let a hard day take the next one with it. A volunteer passed their table carrying a box of donated liners. Annie stood to help her, taking half the load and placing it near the fitting area. Jonathan watched her stop to greet a boy using crutches. She complimented the blue pattern on his socket cover, and within seconds the boy was explaining how he had chosen it to match his favorite basketball team. She makes people feel normal, Jonathan said. Grace shook her head. No. She makes them feel seen. There's a difference. When Annie returned, Jonathan spoke directly to her. I want Bennett Medical Technologies to provide you with a properly fitted prosthetic. Her smile faded into caution. As a gift? As an employee benefit? Only for me? We can review the policy. That isn't what I asked. Jonathan understood. No, not only for you. Any employee whose work requires an assistive device should have a clear process for repair, replacement, and fitting. And no waiting until the device fails completely? No. Annie glanced at Grace, then back at him. I'll accept it if the policy is written first. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Before the fitting? Before the fitting. Grace leaned back, satisfied. I told you she was difficult. Before breakfast, Annie said. Jonathan extended his hand. Agreed. Annie shook it. On the way out, Grace walked beside him while Annie stayed behind to help stack chairs. Charity helped my daughter take her first steps, Grace said. We will always be grateful for that. Jonathan looked back at Annie, who was laughing with one of the volunteers as they folded a table. Grace continued. But justice means she shouldn't have to beg for every step after that. The next morning, Jonathan sent Rachel instructions to draft the new assistive equipment policy and add the diverted accessibility budget to the investigation. Malcolm had tried to close one laboratory door. Instead, he had given Jonathan another reason to examine every locked door in the company. 2 weeks later, Bennett Medical Technologies prepared for its largest product demonstration of the quarter. Hospital buyers, Rehabilitation specialists, veterans organizations, and medical investors filled the main research building before 9 in the morning. A temporary stage had been built inside the central atrium, with 2 large screens displaying the company's newest electronic knee system. Annie arrived early and found a box of printed brochures waiting beside her desk. Claire handed her a guest list. "You'll help with registration. Then bring the technical packets backstage. I thought I was assigned to the demonstration team. You're supporting the demonstration. From registration?" Claire avoided her eyes. Mr. Reed once experienced presenters in front of the guests. Annie looked through the glass toward the stage. Nathan and 3 senior engineers were checking the test unit while Malcolm spoke with a group of investors. "Understood," she said. Marcus waited until Claire walked away. "You helped identify the seal problem. You should be up there. I know what I did. You're not going to challenge it?" "Not 10 minutes before 200 people arrive." She picked up the brochures. "Help me move these before someone writes a report saying I failed at paper." By 10, the atrium was full. Annie greeted guests, directed wheelchair users toward the accessible entrance, and helped an older veteran find a seat near the aisle. Several visitors recognized her from the service center video. "You're the young woman who found the humidity issue," one prosthetist said. "I was part of the team. That was good work. Thank you." Malcolm overheard the exchange as he passed. His smile remained fixed until the visitor walked away. "Miss Carter, backstage," he said. "The demonstration begins in 5 minutes." Behind the curtain, the test knee was attached to a mechanical walking frame. Nathan checked the display while Luis monitored the sensor readings. "Something is off," Luis said. The unit flexed once, then stopped halfway through extension. Nathan reset the control system. "Run it again." The knee moved through 2 steps. On the 3rd, the joint locked. Malcolm entered. "We start in 3 minutes. We have a response delay," Nathan said. "Use the backup unit." Luis connected the second knee. It failed during calibration. Malcolm's face tightened. "What happened?" "The system worked this morning," Nathan said. Annie stepped closer to the monitor. "What changed?" "Nothing," Malcolm replied. "Stay with the event staff." She looked at the readings. "The internal temperature is climbing." Nathan checked the display. "She's right. Both units are warmer than they were during setup." Luis glanced toward the stage lights. "Those lamps have been running for an hour." Annie touched the outside of the protective housing. "The new seal is holding moisture out, but the sensor may still be reacting to heat buildup." "We tested it under heat," Malcolm said. "In the chamber, without stage lights and continuous cycling." Malcolm checked his watch. "We do not have time for another theory." Annie looked beneath the frame. "Open the side vent and move the sensor cover away from the light." Nathan crouched beside the unit. "That might reduce the trapped heat. It could also destabilize the housing," Malcolm said. "We're not changing the housing," Annie replied. "We're cooling the sensor long enough to confirm the cause." Malcolm stared at her. "You are not leading this demonstration." "No, sir. I'm trying to keep it from being canceled." A staff member leaned through the curtain. "Mr. Reed, the guests are waiting." Malcolm turned to Nathan. "You have 60 seconds. Nathan opened the ventilation panel while Luis moved a portable fan behind the frame. Annie watched the temperature reading fall. When it reached the normal range, the knee completed 5 cycles without hesitation. Nathan looked at her. "That was it." "Not all of it," Annie said. "The sensor is still too close to the heat source. We need to explain that before anyone orders the current configuration." Malcolm's voice dropped. "We are not announcing an unresolved defect on stage. A customer will find it if we don't. This is a product presentation, not a confession." Jonathan entered backstage in time to hear the last sentence. "What is unresolved?" he asked. Nathan explained the failure, the heat buildup, and Annie's temporary solution. Jonathan looked at Malcolm. "Was this included in the presentation?" "It happened less than 5 minutes ago." "Then the presentation changes." Malcolm stepped closer. "Jonathan, these people came to see a finished system. They came to decide whether they can trust us." He turned to Nathan. "Can you explain the technical issue?" Nathan nodded, then looked toward Annie. "She can explain it better. She saw the pattern first." Malcolm shook his head. "She is an 18-year-old trainee." Jonathan met Annie's eyes. "Can you do it?" She looked toward the curtain. Beyond it came the low conversation of hundreds of people. "I can explain the problem. And the solution? The solution we have now is temporary. I can explain what needs to happen next." Jonathan nodded. That is what they should hear. A minute later, Malcolm walked onto the stage and introduced the product. His tone gave no sign of the argument backstage. Nathan demonstrated the knee through several controlled steps, then invited Annie forward. Her name was not printed on the program. For a moment, the audience watched the young black woman with the worn prosthetic leg approach the center of the stage. Annie adjusted the microphone and looked at the mechanical frame beside her. "This unit stopped working 6 minutes ago," she said. The room went still. Malcolm's expression hardened at the edge of the stage. Annie continued. "The problem was not the motor, the software, or the person operating it. Heat from the stage lights built up around the sensor faster than our current testing predicted." She pointed to the side panel. "We reduced the temperature by opening the ventilation area, but that is not a final repair. Before this system is released, the sensor placement and heat protection need to be tested under longer, less controlled conditions." A doctor in the front row raised his hand. "Why wasn't this found in the laboratory?" "Because laboratories are controlled," Annie said. "People's lives are not." Several guests nodded. She explained how different walking speeds, outdoor temperatures, and hours of continuous use could affect the device. She avoided unnecessary technical language and answered each question directly. An older veteran stood near the aisle. "So you're telling us the product isn't ready?" "I'm telling you we found something that must be corrected before we ask people to depend on it." The veteran studied her, then nodded. "That's the first honest answer I've heard at one of these demonstrations in years." Applause began near the front and spread across the atrium. Annie did not smile until she stepped away from the microphone. Backstage, Nathan shook her hand. "You saved the demonstration." "No," she said. "We stopped a bad unit from becoming somebody else's problem." Across the room, several doctors and buyers were already asking for Annie by name. Jonathan watched Malcolm observe the crowd gathering around her. For the first time, Annie's ability was no longer hidden inside a service report or a red notebook. Too many people had seen it, and Jonathan knew that made her more valuable to the company and far more dangerous to the men who had worked so hard to keep her invisible. By 8 the next morning, the video of Annie's presentation had already reached several medical forums. Doctors praised the company for admitting a problem before releasing the product, and a veterans organization requested a meeting with the young trainee who had explained the failure. Inside Bennett Medical Technologies, the response was different. Annie arrived at her desk and found 3 new emails from people she had never met. One was from a rehabilitation specialist in Tampa. Another came from a prosthetist in Houston who had seen similar heat-related failures. The third simply said, "Thank you for talking about patients like people." She read each message twice before saving them in a folder. Marcus rolled his chair toward her. "You're famous. I have 43 views on the internal video. It had 6,000 this morning." Annie looked at him. "That seems unnecessary. It's already being shared outside the company." "Does Malcolm know?" Marcus glanced toward the executive offices. "I think the entire building knows." Claire appeared beside Annie's desk with a printed form. "Mr. Reed wants a written statement about yesterday." "What kind of statement?" "A description of your role during the demonstration." Annie took the form. The first paragraph had already been written. At the direction of the senior engineering team, technical trainee Annie Carter assisted with audience communication after a temporary sensor issue was identified during routine pre-demonstration testing. She read it again. "This says the engineering team identified the problem." Claire kept her voice low. "You assisted with the presentation. I found the temperature increase. You were part of the team." "The form doesn't say that." Claire looked around before leaning closer. "Annie, sign it, and let legal handle the language." "Legal wrote this?" "I don't know who wrote it." "Then I'm not signing it." Claire's expression tightened. "Refusing a factual statement may be viewed as insubordination." "It isn't factual." Annie handed the form back. Claire left without another word. An hour later, Malcolm called Annie into his office. Victoria Lang sat beside him with a tablet open on her lap. "Please sit," Malcolm said. Annie remained standing. "My chair is comfortable enough today." Victoria gave her a practiced smile. "This is not disciplinary. That usually means it might become disciplinary." Malcolm folded his hands. "Yesterday placed the company in a difficult position. You disclosed an unresolved technical issue to customers and investors without approval. Mr. Bennett asked me to explain it. He asked you to speak. He did not authorize you to describe the product as unready." "It was unready." Malcolm's jaw shifted. That conclusion belongs to senior engineers. Nathan agreed. Dr. Cole agreed that further testing was needed. That is not the same thing. Victoria turned the tablet toward Annie. Your employee record now includes a note concerning unauthorized public communication and failure to follow the presentation protocol. Annie read the screen. You added this today? We document events when they occur. Does it mention that the unit failed before the demonstration? That information belongs in the engineering report. Does the engineering report mention me? Neither answered. Annie looked at Malcolm. No, it doesn't. Malcolm leaned back. Miss Carter, you have received an unusual amount of access for someone at your level. I suggest you focus on learning, rather than demanding recognition. I didn't demand recognition. You refused to sign a statement because your contribution was not described the way you preferred. I refused because it wasn't true. Victoria locked the tablet. You should consider how difficult it will be to continue in research if every disagreement becomes a question of personal credit. Annie's face remained calm. I don't need every room to like me, she said. I just need the record to tell the truth. She left before either of them responded. Back at her desk, her laboratory access had been removed completely. Her project folders were missing from the shared system, and the test report from the previous day had been moved to a restricted drive. Marcus looked over her shoulder. They locked you out of everything. Not everything. Annie opened her red notebook. She had written the time of the failure, the temperature readings, Nathan's instructions, and the exact moment Jonathan asked her to speak. She also had copies of the humidity results signed by Luis, Marcus, and Nathan. Did you save the emails? Marcus asked. Yes. The original report? Printed and at home. He nodded. Sam trained you well. He told me people who fear the truth usually start by changing the paperwork. Across town, Jonathan sat with Rachel and Daniel in a private conference room. On the screen before them were two versions of the demonstration report. The first listed Annie as the person who identified the heat buildup and proposed the temporary ventilation response. The second had been edited at 6:14 that morning. In that version, Nathan Cole and Malcolm Reed were credited with discovering the issue during a routine engineering review. Annie appeared only as presentation support. Who edited it? Jonathan asked. Rachel enlarged the access log. Victoria's administrative account opened the file first. Malcolm's office approved the final version 23 minutes later. Daniel placed another document beside Jonathan. They also added a performance warning to Annie's record. For what? Unauthorized public communication. Jonathan read it once. I put her on that stage. The warning doesn't mention that. Rachel said. Can they remove her from the program? During the trial period, they can recommend termination for performance or conduct. But if they act after altering the record, it strengthens the argument that this is retaliation. Jonathan stood. I'm reversing the warning. Rachel shook her head. Not yet. They are building a case against her, and we are building one against them. If you erase every move they make, they will change tactics before we finish documenting the pattern. Jonathan walked toward the window. She is 18. She is also collecting evidence more carefully than half the executives in this company. Daniel's phone vibrated. He read the message and looked up. Malcolm has requested an emergency meeting with 3 board members. He says you are interfering with research decisions and creating legal exposure by favoring one trainee. Jonathan turned from the window. Favoring her? He attached the new performance warning and the revised demonstration report. Rachel closed her laptop. He is no longer defending a process. He is preparing to remove you from it. At the research building, Annie received a calendar notification before lunch. Her technical training review had been moved forward by 6 weeks. The new date was Friday. Marcus read the notice beside her. They want you out before the investigation finishes. Annie printed the email and slipped it into her notebook. Then we make sure Friday arrives with the correct record. Outside Malcolm's office, Victoria was already assembling a file marked Annie Carter, Performance and Conduct. In another part of the building, Rachel began preserving every version of that file. Malcolm believed he was erasing Annie's contribution one document at a time. He had not yet understood that each change left a trail. Friday's review lasted 12 minutes. Malcolm sat at one end of the table with Victoria beside him. Annie faced them alone. Jonathan had not been invited, and Rachel had advised him not to force his way into the meeting. Every decision needed to remain on record. Victoria opened Annie's personnel file. The purpose of this review is to determine whether your placement in technical research should continue. Annie placed her red notebook on the table. I understand. Malcolm read from the prepared report. During your training period, you failed to follow communication procedures, entered restricted work areas without proper authorization, and made technical statements to outside guests without approval. Mr. Bennett asked me to speak. That has already been noted. It isn't in the report. Victoria folded her hands. We are reviewing your conduct, not Mr. Bennett's. Annie looked at the document between them. Does it mention the failed unit? The product issue is being handled separately. Does it mention that the laboratory team confirmed my findings? Malcolm set down the page. This is exactly the problem. You continue treating team results as personal achievements. I'm asking for an accurate record. You are a trainee, he said. You were given access to experienced engineers, testing equipment, and executive leadership. Instead of learning from that opportunity, you have challenged the people responsible for supervising you. Annie paused before answering. I learned that a title can decide who signs a report. It cannot change what happened. Victoria's expression hardened. Your technical placement is ending today. You will return to service support while the company reviews your future eligibility. Am I being fired? No. Is my performance being rated as a failure? Malcolm answered. Your work will be described as incomplete due to concerns about professional conduct. Annie opened her notebook and wrote the time. What are you doing? Victoria asked. Keeping the record. Malcolm slid a form across the table. Sign this to acknowledge the decision. Annie read it. The document stated that she accepted the review as fair and complete. I'll sign that I received it, she said. I won't sign that it's accurate. Victoria drew a line through the final sentence and wrote, received only. Annie signed beneath it, closed her notebook and stood. Thank you for letting me know. Malcolm seemed unsettled by her calmness. You have nothing else to say? I said what was true. Saying it louder won't make you write it down. Her badge stopped opening the fourth-floor entrance before she reached the elevator. Marcus waited beside her desk with a cardboard box. They told me to pack your things, he said. Annie looked inside. Her calculator, 2 pencils, a coffee mug, and a copy of the company testing manual had been placed inside. They forgot the box under my desk. Marcus glanced at the foot support. I thought you hated that box. It served with distinction. He added it to the pile. I copied the first version of the demonstration report, he said quietly. The one with your name. You could get in trouble. I watched Nathan repeat your idea in a meeting and receive credit for it. I stayed quiet. I'm not doing that twice. Annie studied him. Thank you. Nathan approached from the laboratory carrying a sealed envelope. These are the signed humidity test results, he said. Luis and I both kept copies. Malcolm won't like that. He doesn't have to. Nathan looked embarrassed. I should have spoken sooner. You're speaking now. That doesn't erase before. No, Annie said. But it changes what happens next. The elevator doors opened. Claire stood several feet away, holding her tablet against her chest. She looked as though she wanted to say something, but Malcolm's office was visible behind her. Annie lifted the box. Goodbye, Claire. Claire lowered her eyes. Good luck. When Annie returned to the West Charlotte Service Center, Helen saw the box and immediately stopped answering her phone. What did they do? They decided I needed more experience. Sam came out of his office. His gaze moved from Annie's old badge to the cardboard box. Did they put the decision in writing? Annie handed him the review. He read the first page, then the second. This says you entered restricted areas. They restricted them after I entered. And unauthorized public communication? Mr. Bennett put me on stage. Sam placed the pages on his desk. They're building a story backward. Helen pulled Annie into a hug before Annie could object. You should let me drive downtown and tell those people what I think. That would probably become another conduct warning. I'm retired from caring about conduct. You're not retired. I can begin today. By lunch, word had spread through the office. Employees came to Annie's desk with documents they had saved. A customer service representative brought printed compliments mentioning Annie by name. Luis emailed the complete return unit data. The new employee Annie had helped with the shipping error gave Sam a written statement describing how often she assisted coworkers. Helen opened a drawer and removed a folder. What is that? Annie asked. Every time you stayed late, covered someone's call, or fixed a customer problem that wasn't yours. You kept a file? I'm 58. We keep receipts. Sam placed his 3 original training recommendations beside the altered corporate versions. "These are going to Rachel Moore," he said. Annie looked around the office. "I don't want anyone risking a job for me." Helen pulled out the chair beside her. "Sit down, honey." Annie did. "This isn't only about you," Helen said. "People here have watched good workers get passed over for years. We told ourselves to keep our heads down because we had mortgages, children, and medical bills. That silence didn't protect us. It protected the people making the decisions." Sam nodded. "Loyalty to a company does not mean helping it hide what is wrong." That afternoon, Rachel arrived with Daniel. She scanned every document, recorded who had provided it, and sealed the originals in numbered folders. "No surprises at the hearing," she told them. "If you know something, say it now. If you only suspect something, label it as suspicion." Annie handed over her notebook but kept it within sight while Rachel copied the relevant pages. Jonathan arrived near 5. He waited until the employees had left before speaking with Annie. "I can reverse Malcolm's decision tonight, and tomorrow he'll say you rescued me again. He removed you because you exposed a problem. Then prove that." Jonathan sat across from her. "This may become public." "I know. I could arrange a private settlement. Your position would be restored, your record corrected, and your education funded. What happens to Malcolm? He remains under investigation. And the next employee he decides doesn't belong?" Jonathan did not answer. Annie closed her notebook. "I spent years trying not to make anyone uncomfortable. Maybe discomfort is what finally makes people look." Daniel entered carrying an envelope delivered from headquarters. Jonathan opened it. The board had called an emergency meeting for Monday morning. The agenda listed 4 matters: Jonathan's executive authority, Annie's technical placement, ownership of the censor findings, and the internal personnel investigation. Rachel read the notice over his shoulder. "Malcolm believes he has enough votes." Jonathan looked at Annie. "You do not have to attend." "Yes," she said. "I do." On Monday, Jonathan could lose control of the company he had built. Annie could lose the career she had barely been allowed to begin. But when they entered that boardroom, they would not be asking Malcolm to show mercy. They would be asking him to explain the record. Monday morning arrived under a low gray sky. Jonathan entered Bennett Medical Technologies headquarters through the main lobby at 8:15. Daniel walked beside him carrying 2 locked document cases, while Rachel followed with her laptop bag and a folder containing the board notice. Annie waited near the elevators with Sam. She wore the navy jacket Grace had bought for her assessment and held the red notebook against her chest. "You came early," Jonathan said. "I didn't want traffic to become part of Malcolm's evidence." Sam adjusted his tie. "She has been making jokes since 6:30. It keeps him from giving speeches," Annie said. Rachel looked at each of them. "Once we enter, let Malcolm finish. Do not interrupt, unless the chairman asks a direct question. We answer with records, not anger." Sam nodded. Annie did too. Jonathan said nothing. Rachel turned toward him. "That includes you. I heard you. You also heard me on Friday." "I remember." "Good. Today would be a poor day to develop selective memory." The elevator carried them to the executive floor. No one spoke during the ride. When the doors opened, Daniel led Sam and Annie to a waiting room beside the board chamber. Jonathan stopped before Annie entered. "You can still decide not to testify." She looked through the glass wall at the long table inside. "They discussed my work, my record, and whether I belong here without ever asking me. I'm done letting other people explain me." Jonathan nodded. "Then wait until Rachel calls you." The boardroom held 11 directors, most of them men and women Jonathan had known for years. Some avoided his eyes. Others greeted him with the formal politeness reserved for a colleague who might not hold the same title by the end of the morning. Malcolm sat near the center of the table. Victoria occupied the chair beside him with Annie's personnel file open in front of her. Board Chairman Edward Hale called the meeting to order. "We are here to review 4 related matters," he said. "Mr. Bennett's recent executive intervention, Ms. Carter's technical placement, ownership of the censor findings, and the status of the internal personnel inquiry." Malcolm rose. He began without raising his voice. "Bennett Medical Technologies employs more than 6,000 people. Our success depends on clear standards, established reporting structures, and decisions made by qualified professionals." A screen behind him displayed Annie's employee record. "Miss Carter joined the West Charlotte Service Center 6 months ago. She is 18 years old, has no college degree, and has limited technical training. Despite this, Mr. Bennett personally intervened to place her in a research environment. Jonathan opened his mouth, but Rachel touched the edge of his folder. Malcolm continued. Within weeks, Ms. Carter entered restricted areas, bypassed reporting procedures, and made statements before customers and investors concerning an unfinished product. Mr. Bennett then blocked corrective action, ordered a broad investigation, and questioned senior officers based largely on the treatment of one trainee. A board member named Charles Whitmore leaned forward. Are you saying the internal investigation has no basis? I am saying its origin was emotional rather than procedural. Victoria distributed copies of Annie's accelerated review. Malcolm pointed to the conduct section. Ms. Carter resisted supervision and treated team findings as personal property. Her laboratory access was restricted only after repeated concerns about protocol. Rachel wrote something on her legal pad. Malcolm changed the screen. A chart appeared showing expenses connected to the new assistive equipment policy, the independent tests, and outside legal review. This is not about whether Ms. Carter is hardworking or sympathetic. It is about whether a corporation can be governed by individual stories instead of consistent standards. One director glanced toward Jonathan. Did you order a company-wide policy review after meeting this employee? Yes, Jonathan said. Malcolm nodded as though the answer proved his case. And did you personally authorize her participation in the public demonstration? Yes. Did you override research and operations to do so? The product had failed. That is not what I asked. Jonathan looked at Edward Hale. May I answer fully? The chairman nodded. I authorized Annie to explain what happened, because she identified the cause while Malcolm was preparing to present a product he knew had just failed. Malcolm's expression tightened. The issue was temporary and under review. It was unresolved. It was a development prototype, and the guests deserved to know that before placing orders. Charles Whitmore turned to Malcolm. Was the unit presented as ready for release? Malcolm paused. It was presented as a late-stage development system. Rachel slid a document toward Jonathan. He placed it on the table. The event program described it as market-ready pending final certification. Several directors began reading. Malcolm returned to his seat. That wording came from communications. Jonathan looked toward Victoria. Using funds transferred from employee accessibility? The room went quiet. Edward Hale raised a hand. We will address financial transfers later. Mr. Bennett, you may present your response. Jonathan stood slowly. He had prepared pages of notes but left them inside the folder. For years, I asked for reports instead of asking people, he began. I accepted green charts, clean summaries, and performance ratings because they made this company easier to manage. He looked around the table. When I visited the West Charlotte Center, I found an employee using a prosthetic leg that barely functioned. That caught my attention, but it was not why I placed her in technical training. He distributed Annie's assessment results. She passed the same evaluation offered to other applicants. Her scores in fault detection, user analysis, and practical problem solving were among the highest in the group. Malcolm spoke from his seat. One assessment does not replace professional experience. No, that is why she was made a trainee. Jonathan placed Sam's 3 original recommendations beside the shortened corporate versions. These are the requests submitted by her manager. These are the versions that reached the decision file. The descriptions of Annie's technical ability were removed. Victoria shifted in her chair. The summaries were standardized. Only after her qualifications disappeared. Jonathan displayed promotion data collected by Rachel's team. Employees from service centers, disabled employees, and black employees had advanced at lower rates despite comparable performance scores. Accommodation requests remained pending for months. Accessibility funds had been transferred into a marketing campaign about inclusion. A director named Margaret Ellis removed her glasses. Who approved the transfer? Malcolm's division requested it, Jonathan said. Victoria certified that no urgent employee needs remained unmet. Victoria sat straighter. That statement was based on the reports provided to Human Resources. Reports your office controlled. Malcolm rose again. This is becoming an accusation without context. Jonathan faced him. The context is the company. He turned back to the board. Malcolm did not build this system alone. He built it in the space my absence gave him. I allowed senior titles to replace direct observation. I let summaries replace names. I believed that because I had not personally ordered discrimination, it could not exist under my authority. No one interrupted him. That failure is mine. Edward Hale studied him. Are you admitting negligence? I am admitting responsibility. Malcolm shook his head. Jonathan, you are placing the stability of this corporation at risk over one employee. No, Jonathan said. Annie was simply the first person I finally noticed. He picked up the altered performance warning. This record says she spoke without authorization. I put her on the stage. It says she entered restricted spaces. Those spaces were restricted after her work exposed a product defect. It says she claimed team findings as her own, yet her name was removed from reports written from her notes. Malcolm's voice sharpened. We have standards. Jonathan looked directly at him. Whose standard? The standard of the work, or the standard of the people you prefer to see doing it? Silence settled across the room. Edward Hale closed the file in front of him. We will now hear from Miss Carter. Outside the boardroom, Annie heard the assistant call her name. She stood, placed the red notebook beneath her arm and lifted the canvas bag containing her old prosthetic leg. Sam opened the door for her. Tell the truth, he said. Annie looked into the room where men and women with titles had been deciding her future. That was always the plan. Annie entered the boardroom with the canvas bag in one hand and her red notebook beneath her arm. The room seemed colder than the hallway, though no one had touched the thermostat. Jonathan moved his chair back to give her space. Rachel pointed toward the empty seat beside the presentation screen, but Annie remained standing. Edward Hale looked at the bag. Miss Carter, you may begin whenever you're ready. Annie set the notebook on the table, opened the canvas bag and removed her old prosthetic leg. The metal joint touched the polished wood with a hard click. Several directors looked down at it. This leg came from the Carolina Children's Mobility Fund when I was 15, Annie said. My mother and I could not afford one on our own. I'm grateful for it. It got me through high school, 2 bus rides every morning, and my first 6 months at this company. She rested one hand on the worn socket. But gratitude does not mean I should accept every place someone decides I'm allowed to stand. Malcolm shifted in his seat. No one has questioned your gratitude. I know. You questioned my ability. Edward raised a hand before Malcolm could respond. Let her finish. Annie opened her notebook to the first marked page. When I started at the West Charlotte Service Center, customers called about knee units that clicked or slowed down after several hours of use. Most of those cases were recorded as improper fitting. She turned the notebook so the directors could see the columns. I wrote down the model numbers, locations, temperatures, and what each customer was doing when the problem started. 19 of the 27 returned units were the same model. Most came from hot, humid states. A director near the end of the table asked, Were you assigned to collect this information? No, Mom. Then why did you? Because the explanations did not match what the customers were telling us. Annie connected her laptop to the screen. A chart appeared showing dates, serial numbers, and weather conditions. The standard laboratory test lasted 45 minutes. Customers were wearing the units for hours. When we extended the test under heat and humidity, the locking response slowed. Moisture reached the sensor seal, and the adhesive softened. She displayed photographs of the failed seal, followed by the signed test timeline. Luis Ortega, Marcus Lee, and Dr. Nathan Cole were present. Their signatures are at the bottom. Malcolm leaned forward. No one disputes that the team conducted the test. Annie looked at him. Then why was my name removed from the report? He did not answer. She placed 2 printed documents beside each other. This is the first version. It says I identified the pattern and proposed the extended humidity test. This is the version approved the next morning. It says the issue was discovered during a routine engineering review. Edward studied the pages. Rachel, have these been authenticated? Yes, Rachel said. The first document came from the company server archive. The second was edited through Victoria Lang's administrative account and approved by Mr. Reed's office. Victoria spoke quickly. Administrative accounts are used by several staff members. Rachel opened her laptop. The login came from your assigned computer at 6:14 a.m. Your security badge entered the building at 6:02. Victoria stopped speaking. Annie continued. At the product demonstration, the test unit failed because the sensor overheated under the stage lights. Mr. Bennett asked me to explain what happened. The next morning, my record said I had made unauthorized public statements. She displayed Jonathan's written instruction from the event log. The warning does not mention that he placed me on the stage. Charles Whitmore looked toward Malcolm. Why was that omitted? Malcolm kept his voice controlled. The concern was not whether she was invited to speak. It was how she described an unfinished product in front of customers. I told them the truth, Annie said. You told them it was not ready. It wasn't. A few directors exchanged glances. Annie removed several folded diagrams from the bag and placed them on the table. These are my notes from the laboratory. This one shows the heat buildup around the sensor housing. This one shows the ventilation change we used during the demonstration. The dates are written here. She pointed to the lower corner of each page. The company's revised report was created 2 days later. Margaret Ellis leaned closer. Who else had these drawings? Marcus Lee and Dr. Cole saw them. I kept the originals. And the red notebook? I kept that too. Malcolm gave a short laugh. We are treating handwritten notes from a trainee as if they are a patent record. Annie turned toward him. No, sir. We are treating them as evidence that the official record was changed. The room went quiet again. Rachel stood and distributed the access logs. The technical documents were not the only records altered. Miss Carter's performance file changed after she identified the defect. Positive customer comments were removed from the summary. 3 recommendations from Samuel Wilson were shortened before review. Her laboratory access was restricted the day after the signed test results were filed. Edward looked at Sam, who waited near the wall. Mr. Wilson, please come forward. Sam took the empty chair beside Annie. Did you write these recommendations? Edward asked. Yes, sir. Did you describe Miss Carter as lacking technical potential? No. Were you informed that your evaluations had been shortened? No. Why did you recommend her 3 times? Because she earned it 3 times. Helen appeared on the video screen from the West Charlotte office. She wore her reading glasses and held a folder against her chest. Edward addressed her. Miss Parker, how long have you worked with Annie? 6 months. Has she received special treatment? Helen looked directly into the camera. She received an old folding chair in a storage room. If that counts, then yes. A few people around the table shifted. Helen opened the folder. I kept records of late calls, corrected shipping errors and customer compliments. Annie never asked me to. I kept them because the official evaluations did not match the young woman working beside me. Malcolm rubbed a hand over his jaw. We are hearing praise from coworkers who are personally attached to her. Sam turned toward him. People become attached to someone after watching how she works. That does not make the work imaginary. Edward looked at Annie. Do you believe you should be placed in research because of your disability? No. Because of your race? No. Then what are you asking this board to do? Annie placed both hands beside the old prosthetic leg. I am not asking you to put me in that laboratory because I lost a leg. I am asking you not to keep me out after I proved I can do the work. No one moved. She looked around the table, meeting each director's eyes. Justice is not giving me something I did not earn. Justice is returning the credit that should never have been taken from me. Jonathan lowered his gaze for a moment. Annie closed the red notebook. I know I am 18. I know I have more to learn. I am willing to take every class, pass every test, and accept every correction that is fair. But I will not sign a false report just to make powerful people comfortable. Edward removed his glasses and placed them on the table. Thank you, Miss Carter. Annie picked up the old prosthetic but did not return it to the bag. It remained on the table between the board and Malcolm, a worn piece of equipment beside years of polished reports. The evidence had been presented. What happened next would show whether the company valued the truth only when it was profitable. Edward Hale called a 20-minute recess. The directors left the boardroom in small groups, carrying copies of the reports Rachel had distributed. Malcolm remained near the window with Victoria, speaking too quietly for anyone else to hear. Annie sat beside Sam. Her old prosthetic still rested on the table. You did well, Sam said. I talked too fast near the end. You told the truth. People rarely complain about the speed when they don't like the destination. Jonathan stood across the room with Rachel and Daniel. He could see 2 directors arguing near the hallway, while another spoke privately with Malcolm. How many votes does he have? Jonathan asked. Before this morning, probably 6, Rachel said. Now I'm not certain. That isn't comforting. It isn't supposed to be. Daniel looked toward Annie. Some of them want a compromise. What kind? Restore her position, correct the report, and close the personnel investigation. Jonathan turned to him. And Malcolm? He stays. Rachel closed her folder. They will say removing 2 senior officers at once creates instability. They mean it affects the stock price. They mean several things. Most of them involve money. Jonathan watched Malcolm shake hands with a director who had remained silent throughout Annie's testimony. If they keep him, he will rebuild the same system with different paperwork. Rachel nodded. Then make them choose openly. The directors returned 23 minutes later. Edward waited until everyone was seated before speaking. The board agrees that Miss Carter's technical contribution was not accurately reflected in the final report. We also agree that her performance warning should be removed. Annie did not react. Edward continued. There is support for restoring her research placement and conducting an outside review of the employee evaluation process. Malcolm leaned back, his expression controlled. However, Edward said, some directors believe immediate termination of senior leadership would cause unnecessary damage before a full investigation is completed. Jonathan looked around the table. Which senior leadership? Mr. Reed and Miss Lang. So the records were altered. Funds were redirected, and an employee was punished after exposing a product failure. But removing the people responsible would be considered damaging. Charles Whitmore raised a hand. No one is denying that serious errors occurred. We are discussing the responsible way to move forward. Responsible for whom? Jonathan asked. For 6,000 employees, our investors and the hospitals that depend on us. Annie looked toward Jonathan, but he kept his attention on the board. Margaret Ellis spoke next. The proposal is to restore Miss Carter's position, place a formal correction in her file, and continue the investigation under board supervision. Malcolm and Victoria would remain in their roles but lose authority over her case. Jonathan gave a short nod. You want to protect Annie without changing the people who made protecting her necessary. That is not what I said. It is what the proposal does. Malcolm leaned forward. Jonathan, this company cannot be dismantled every time an internal process fails. This was not one process. The investigation is incomplete. The editing logs are complete. The budget transfer is complete. The false performance warning is complete. Victoria spoke for the first time since the recess. No one has proven that I personally intended to discriminate against Miss Carter. Rachel answered before Jonathan could. Intent is relevant. So are actions, patterns, and documented consequences. Edward raised his hand. We are not holding a trial. No, Jonathan said. A trial would require everyone to testify under oath. The room went silent. Edward studied him. What are you proposing? Jonathan opened the folder in front of him and removed a single sheet of paper. I am proposing that Malcolm Reed be terminated, Victoria Lang be suspended pending an outside investigation, every employee evaluation from the last 5 years be reviewed, and all accessibility funds transferred to communications be restored. Charles frowned. That could cost millions. It should. You are asking the board to admit that the problem extends beyond Miss Carter. It does. And if the board refuses? Jonathan placed the paper on the table. Rachel had seen the letter. No one else had. Edward picked it up and read the first line. This is your resignation, effective immediately if the board chooses to protect the system we exposed today. Malcolm stared at him. You would walk away from the company you built over this? Jonathan looked at Annie's old prosthetic lying among the reports. No, I would walk away because of what I allowed this company to become. You're threatening the board. I'm giving the board an honest choice. Keep Malcolm. Close the investigation and explain publicly why I resigned. Or remove him and repair what he damaged. Margaret looked toward Rachel. Would he release the records? Rachel did not soften her answer. The evidence concerns employee rights, product reporting, and the use of designated accessibility funds. Concealing it would create greater legal exposure than disclosing it. Malcolm pushed his chair back. This is reckless. Jonathan met his eyes. Reckless was blaming customers for defective equipment. Reckless was altering records because the truth came from someone you did not respect. Malcolm pointed toward Annie. You are risking a corporation over an 18-year-old trainee. Annie spoke before Jonathan could answer. No, sir. The company was already at risk. I just wrote down what everyone else kept ignoring. Edward called for a formal vote. The first motion concerned Malcolm's termination. 4 directors voted against it. 7 voted in favor. For the first time that morning, Malcolm lost control of his expression. This board will regret acting on emotion, he said. Edward looked at the evidence spread across the table. The decision is based on the record. Security waited outside while Malcolm collected his documents. The second vote suspended Victoria and referred the altered files and budget transfers to an independent investigator. It passed 8-3. The remaining measures passed one after another. Review 5 years of promotion decisions, restore the accessibility budget, create an independent employee rights panel, and protect every worker who had provided evidence. Annie's warning was removed. Her research placement was restored under a paid technical assistant contract. The company agreed to support her education at Central Piedmont, provided she met the same academic standards applied to every scholarship recipient. Jonathan would remain chairman during the reform period, but an outside committee would review executive decisions. When the meeting ended, directors began leaving without conversation. Jonathan folded his resignation letter and returned it to the folder. Annie picked up her old prosthetic. "You were really going to leave," she said. "Yes. For someone you met 3 months ago? For people I should have noticed years ago?" Annie looked through the glass wall toward employees moving between offices below. "I'm grateful," she said. "But don't turn me into the happy ending." Jonathan waited. She held the worn prosthetic against her side. "Now, make sure I'm not the last one they finally see." Jonathan looked at the corrected reports, the investigation order, and the empty chair Malcolm had occupied. The vote had ended the fight inside the boardroom. Changing the company would require him to keep making the same choice after no one was watching. 1 year later, Jonathan returned to the West Charlotte Service Center without an assistant, a scheduled tour, or a manager waiting at the entrance. He parked between the same rows of pickup trucks and compact cars, carried his own coffee inside, and nodded to the security guard. "Morning, Mr. Bennett." "Morning, George. How's your knee?" "Better since your people stopped calling every problem user error." Jonathan smiled. Good answer. The center looked familiar, but it no longer felt forgotten. New workstations filled one side of the service floor, and an electronic board displayed customer issues being reviewed across the company. Employees could now flag a pattern without waiting for a supervisor to approve the concern. Jonathan walked toward the hallway where he had first heard Annie's prosthetic lock clicking behind a half-open door. The storage room was gone. In its place stood a bright employee support room with an adjustable chair, a fitting bench, and cabinets containing replacement straps, socket liners, and basic mobility supplies. A physical therapist visited twice each month, and employees could request assistance through an independent system that did not pass through their direct supervisors. The old folding chair remained in one corner. Above it, a framed sign read, "No one should have to hide their pain to keep their job." Jonathan rested a hand on the chair's metal back. "You're early." He turned. Sam Wilson stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. His hair had grown whiter, but his gray Bennett polo was still tucked into pressed khakis. "I thought senior advisors arrived before everyone else," Jonathan said. "Senior advisors arrive when they feel like it." Sam handed him a cup. Jonathan nodded toward the room. "You kept the chair." Helen insisted. "Of course she did. She said if we threw it away, some executive might start believing the company had always done the right thing." Jonathan took a sip. "Where is she?" "Training 2 new customer service employees and making them afraid to skip breakfast." They stepped onto the main floor. Near the reception desk, Helen stood over a young man who was trying to work while holding an unopened container of oatmeal. "You have 5 minutes before I feed you myself," she said. The young man looked toward Jonathan for help. Jonathan raised both hands. "I don't interfere with established authority." Helen noticed him. "You learned something after all." She hugged him before he could offer a handshake. A plate of pecan bars sat beside her keyboard. Jonathan picked one up. "That is your second," Helen said. "I just arrived. I know what happened to the first one." He looked at Sam. Sam was already eating it. Across the office, several employees gathered around a large screen. Annie stood among them wearing dark slacks and a blue Bennett research jacket. A new prosthetic supported her right leg, its socket shaped to fit properly, and its locking system responding without hesitation. Her red notebook rested on the desk beside her. She was 19 now, and halfway through her engineering technology program at Central Piedmont Community College. She worked part-time with the research division while spending 1 day each week at the service center, where customer complaints still taught her things laboratory reports did not. On the screen was a map showing electronic knee performance in different climates. A young trainee using a wheelchair pointed to a cluster of reports along the Gulf Coast. Could the seal be reacting to salt exposure? Maybe, Annie said. What else do those customers have in common? They live near the water. That's location. What were they doing? The trainee checked the notes. 3 were fishing. 2 work at marinas. Annie nodded. Good. Don't decide the answer yet. Build the question first. Jonathan waited until the group separated. Annie looked over and smiled. Mr. Bennett, Miss Carter, you're not scheduled until 10. I came early. That makes 2 of us. Her gait was smoother, though Jonathan noticed she still paused before making a sharp turn. The new prosthetic had improved her mobility, not rewritten her life. Annie never pretended otherwise. How's the leg? He asked. We're getting along. No negotiations? Only about stairs. She tapped the carbon fiber frame lightly. The lock answered with one clean click. Jonathan looked toward the red notebook. Still using that? The company gave me 3 tablets. None of them fit in my jacket pocket. The sensor correction Annie had helped develop was now used throughout Bennett's electronic knee line. Product failures in hot and humid regions had dropped, and Annie's name appeared as a contributor on the pending patent. She had used part of her first performance bonus to support the Carolina Children's Mobility Fund. Grace had tried to stop her. Annie had donated the money anyway. How is your mother? Jonathan asked. Working fewer nights and bothering more people. She calls it volunteering, Grace said from behind him. Jonathan turned as she approached, carrying a box of application forms. She now helped families request mobility grants and challenge insurance denials. Grace shook his hand. Good to see you. You too. Annie says you're bothering people. I raised her. She should recognize professional skill. Annie looked inside the box. More applications? 7 families. 2 were denied because the wording on the forms didn't match the insurance codes. Send me copies. You have class tonight. I can look at them tomorrow. Grace gave Jonathan a familiar look. She has a properly fitted leg now. We're still working on properly fitted boundaries, Jonathan said. That program may take longer. The company had changed in ways that could be measured. Every internship was now paid. Technical candidates were evaluated through published standards. Employees could review the history of changes made to their performance files, and promotion decisions required written explanations. 5 years of old evaluations had been reopened. Some decisions remained unchanged, but dozens of employees received new training opportunities, corrected records, or compensation. Victoria Lang had been dismissed after the independent investigation confirmed that she had altered personnel files and falsely certified that accommodation requests had been resolved. Malcolm Reed no longer worked in medical technology. The board had referred the financial transfers and altered product records to federal investigators. Jonathan did not consider their removal the company's greatest change. The greater change was that employees had stopped assuming silence was the price of keeping their jobs. Sam joined the Employee Advisory Council and refused an office at headquarters. Helen became an official mentor for new service workers, though she claimed the title only meant she could now tell people to eat breakfast with board approval. The Bennett Opportunity Fund supported students from working-class families, including Black students and people with disabilities pursuing careers in engineering and medical technology. The New Steps Fund helped provide prosthetic fittings, repairs, and physical therapy to families whose insurance did not cover the full cost. Jonathan still read reports, but he no longer mistook them for the whole truth. Each month, he spent 2 days visiting service centers, factories, and laboratories without prepared presentations. During employee meetings, direct supervisors were asked to leave the room. Not every visit uncovered injustice. Sometimes employees complained about vending machines, parking spaces, or coffee. Jonathan listened anyway. Annie motioned toward the training area. The new internship group starts today. Jonathan recognized none of the young people waiting inside, which pleased him. One was a veteran missing his left arm. Another was a Black student from a rural community college. A middle-aged mother sat beside a young man who used a wheelchair. None had come through family connections or elite universities. Their applications had been reviewed without photographs, names, or home addresses during the first stage. Jonathan watched Annie hand each person a training packet. A year earlier, she had entered the research building carrying a discount store jacket and an old prosthetic. While people with better titles decided she was an act of charity, now she was the person welcoming others into the room. What do the reports say about the new program? Jonathan asked. Annie glanced at him. They say it's working. And what do the people say? She opened the door leading toward the work floor. "Come see for yourself." Annie walked ahead, the lock in her prosthetic sounding firm with each step. Jonathan followed. He had once believed a report could tell him the value of a company. It could measure profit, efficiency, and growth. But it could not show him the young employee helping a frightened customer, the older manager preserving a rejected recommendation, or the coworker who finally decided silence was not loyalty. Those truths lived beyond the executive floor. They waited in service centers, storage rooms, and conversations leaders were often too busy to hear. Jonathan had come to Charlotte to inspect his employees. Annie Carter had taught him to inspect the system instead. This story reminds us that talent can be overlooked when people judge others by race, disability, age, or social background instead of their actions. Annie did not need pity. She needed a fair chance to prove what she could do. Jonathan learned that good leadership requires more than reading reports. It requires listening, observing, and taking responsibility when a system treats people unfairly. True justice is not giving someone an advantage they did not earn, but removing the barriers that kept their hard work from being recognized. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real, and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.